Have you ever felt overwhelmed with all that's going on in the world? Sometimes we don't realize that we can make a difference. My name is Debbie Van Grieken, and it is my hope to inspire you to take small steps towards social impact. Join us each week as we have conversations with those who have taken simple steps towards living a more sustainable and socially conscious lifestyle. If you want to make social impact, let's start small. The Small Steps podcast is proudly sponsored by Moya Shea Products. As a listener, enjoy 15% off your online purchase. Use code SMALLSTEPS15 at checkout. At Moya, we believe in people helping people. Supporting the local and global communities that help our organization succeed is very important to us. We apply a fair trade framework when purchasing raw materials, supporting farmers and families. Thinking global and acting local, Moya works with organizations to better the lives of children through education and fair trade. Are you looking for the best moisturizer for beautiful, healthy, glowing skin? Our Shea products are superb moisturizers and have exceptional healing properties for those suffering from skin issues. Check out these products and our wellness line at moyasheabutter.com. Welcome back to the Start Small podcast. I'm your host, Debbie Van Grieken, and I am thrilled today to be interviewing Bianca Metz. Bianca is a sustainable living specialist and tiny house consultant, founder of the Giving Tree family, where she guides others on how to downsize and live with less. Bianca, along with her husband Justin and toddler Bodhi, live in a 240 square foot house on 6 acres of land in Hamilton, Ontario. They're working as land stewards, keeping bees and raising chickens. She uses the principles of permaculture, minimalism, and sustainable living in both her business and her life to live more simply, slowly, and closer to nature. I'm so excited to get into this. Hi, Bianca. It's so great to have you here today. Well, I have to say, I am one of these people. I've binge watched Tiny Homes Nation on Netflix and all the alternative living programs that they have on there. I'm absolutely fascinated by this. And it's something that I think if I was to do it all over again, I think that this is something I would have done. So I have to ask you, why did you go tiny?
The golden question. So my husband is specifically the one who kind of encouraged this dream. He is by trade a wilderness adventure guide. He's been working in the outdoor education world for years, and now he's a Montessori outdoor education teacher as well. And so his philosophy is to, you really need to practice what you preach. And a lot of us have these beautiful guiding principles in life, and we have an intention and well set up life or a relationship with nature and all of these different things, but there's often a challenge to really and truly connect with that on a higher level. And so honestly, one day we were sitting and he just said, I don't want to live in our condo anymore. I don't want to live in the city anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to move into a tiny house or a yurt or something. And we knew a person who had property who was willing to let us land steward in exchange for living on the property. And so we just built a proposal and we took the opportunity to ask. And the answer was a resounding absolutely. Let's do this. And so that's kind of where the journey started, but it was kind of brought about so organically in that Justin and I, as a couple, we have a huge appreciation for the outdoors and for the natural world. And Justin does a lot of work in conservation and now with my business and kind of transforming my personal way of life and building those guiding principles to have a relationship with nature. The tiny house kind of model of living just really fit that. We were just feeling so much overwhelmed with our lives. We were just sick of it. And we didn't want to feel that anymore. So it just made sense.
That's so incredible. And I imagine, though, that there must have been some major challenges that you had to overcome. Maybe you can share a little bit of those challenges with us.
Sure. So the biggest challenge we needed to overcome right at the beginning of the journey was essentially how to get started. How did we figure out what structure we wanted? Was it a yurt? Was it a tiny house? Was it a straw bale home? We knew that we wanted kind of a sustainable structure. We just didn't really know what that looked like. And so we did a lot of research into how to make that happen. We had to figure out what the zoning bylaws were on the property that we lived at. We had to figure out how to gain insurance for a temporary or a permanent structure. structure. There are a ton of different avenues that we needed to look at before we landed on the tiny house model. And so that took a really long time to figure out because, like you said, tiny house nation is so popular and so well followed. The challenge there is that model of living isn't a supported Canadian model of living. We live in a 4-season climate. We live with a very strict municipal level of government that really protects its land use pretty strictly, which is great until it doesn't serve them anymore. And then they, seed up conservative areas and different things, but we can get into that later. And so that was really the biggest challenge, was how to get started and how to do it legally and how to kind of figure out the steps from there. Now, once we embarked on the journey, the biggest challenge was how to get the house here, which was fun. And then once we got it to the property, hooking it up. So we didn't even have water for a couple months. Thank goodness the primary property here did have running water and showers and a kitchen. So we were able to use that. But our son, Bodhi, was about 1.5 years old when we did this, when we moved from our condo. And so that was a big challenge, but you know what? It was so part of the journey. We had already put our mentality in this. We're taking this risk. We're doing it. We're not going to let anyone stop us. This is happening and we're just going to have to roll with the punches at this point. And so coming into it with that mentality really helped. Ongoing challenges would definitely be, we're pretty confident people in what we're doing, and we're extremely excited to be living this way of life because we really believe in it and we believe that it can be a way to protect our future and certainly our son's future. But we definitely get a lot of people, naysayers and different things who don't understand this model of living because they're stuck in a formula of living that, supports the glamorized American dream. And so that's a challenge, but it's more so an opportunity, I think, a learning opportunity. But other than that, honestly, a lot of the challenges that people think about immediately when they think about living in 240 square feet is space. And we have, of course, we have a small home, but we've made it so spacious. We absolutely love it. I don't want to go. I get pretty anxious in bigger homes, to be honest. We have 6 acres to play with. We moved here so we could have access to land. So space is not even a concern at all unless we want to have another baby, in which case we'll have to get another room onto the house.
Yeah, it's so incredible when you're talking about this. I can understand some of the comments and things that you might get from family and friends and, strangers, really, quite frankly, that don't understand. I myself, as a mom, it's been, I was raised a certain way that, there was a certain order in things in life and what you did and how you go about stuff and expectations. And as I was raising my kids, I definitely was putting that into them. And then there was kind of a shift and I started to realize, wait a minute, this is not necessarily the way of the future. And people can go back and listen to some of my earlier podcast episodes. One of the episodes I interviewed my son, Hayden, who is a tree planter, and he's currently living in the summers in a van. So he's converted a van into a living space so that he can live in the bush while planting trees up in Northern Ontario. So as a mom, though, I had to get used to that and see that his direction in life was different than my direction in life. And so maybe you can share, how did some of the people around you, close to you, feel about this switch from condo living to tiny home living?
Yeah, we definitely felt resistance from a few people. We felt support from a few people. We felt a sense of confusion from a few people. And so we had a kind of myriad and range of reactions to this. And so most of the reluctant reactions was just completely out of concern of the unknown. And that's completely fair. I mean, I had them too. And I talk a lot about this because we are really stuck in this formula of living. And so, we look at our grandparents and our great grandparents who, after the war, they finally were able to find their slice of paradise, and they had access to homes. They could build their own little nuclear families. And so that's when really consumption exploding, all of these different tactics to let us know that, unless you have a big house and a nice car, you may not be successful. So a lot of the kind of challenges we have with society and with the people who surrounded us who were a little more reluctant was just kind of challenging that notion of how you measure success. Is success going to school, getting a degree, getting a really good paying job, getting a big house, buying a nice car, and doing all of those different things, buying all the things for your home, filling that? Or is success to you, is it truly happiness? Is it building community? Is it doing all of these different things? And for us, we didn't see success in monetary gain, and we didn't value success and measure it in having, living in a cool condo in the city and that kind of thing. And so once we started breaking down those notions and breaking down those barriers, people really started responding to it. And our family, they come now, some of the more reluctant, they come to the property and they see Bodhi running around in the gardens and eating mulberries from the tree and watering the plants. And he's just such a beautiful, kind, considerate soul. And they're just astounded and saying, this is incredible. You'd think that, he doesn't have a lot of toys. He doesn't have a lot of things. He has I practice minimalism in my parenting. He's outside and he's experiencing all of these things, and that gift will never be able to be exchanged. And so, to kind of work back to your answer, it is really tough to kind of step outside of that formula. And so it's something that takes a lot of education and takes a lot of patience and holding space for. And so I'm an elder millennial, I like to call myself. I'm 32. I was born in 88. So I'm on that kind of elder scope of it. And so other generations like to kind of poke fun of a little bit, and we like to poke fun at ourselves. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because we had this dream of, our parents made us go to school, or didn't make us go to school, but school and our parents and society made us feel that after high school, we need to go to university and we need to get a degree. And we all spent a lot of money to do that, whether it was borrowing or not. And a lot of us are stuck with zero practical application and skills. And, coming out of university with, a degree, but not really being able to apply it to anything, and then needing 5+ experience in a practical field. And so we found that those who went to college and received a designation or a practical degree are far better off than a lot of us with university degrees, because none of us are practicing it. So it's just a way that the formula has failed us. And so Justin and I were not pleased with that. And we will not have that journey for Bodhi. He can do whatever he wants to do. And I love that you had that shift with your child.
Yeah, and I think I really see that this is going to be a way in the future, because obviously we're now going to be faced with severe economic crisis and so many challenges in the near future. And so I think that people are going to have to change their focus. They are going to have to get creative. They are going to have to change really their thinking of what they do believe success is. And I think that there is a lot more support for that now. And thanks to people like you too, who are leading the way and showing people that this is a great alternative. We spoke a little bit about some of the challenges, and some of that was legalities. I'm hoping in this new future that we'll have less challenges around that, but you are facing some challenges with legality. So if people are looking for this kind of alternative lifestyle, or I hate to even call it that, because I really don't think it's an alternative. I think it's something that is just, we should be embracing. But how do you, recommend people to start researching this? What are some of the legal issues that they need to be prepared to work through? Is there anything that's coming on the horizon that might be changing some of these regulations and laws?
I'll talk a little bit about how to approach the journey. So in terms of alternative living, it's really important to design this and be intentional and take the time to really carve out and gain clarity on what it is you want to do. And so whether that is a model of living where you're living in a sustainable structure and you're living on land, whether that's your own land or someone else's, there are so many considerations, because this is so niche and because this is so new and because there's so much red tape still. I could probably talk about this answer the next 5 hours, because every decision that you make will lead you down a different path. But to kind of give you some tangibles, essentially with the tiny house bylaws in Ontario specifically, I don't know about the rest of Canada, out west is a little more liberal. In Ontario, there's a very big preconceived notion that tiny houses on wheels specifically are not legal, and they are. So if you go to the Government of Ontario's website and just search tiny house living, it's a document on there. I think it's on their innovation page. And so this is an actual document that can go through exactly how to build, design, permit, and live in a tiny house on wheels. So here's where it gets tricky though, because the Government of Ontario can put this out and regulate this, but it's really down to the municipalities and the townships that can decide whether or not tiny houses on wheels specifically can be placed on a property as a permitted use. And this is where we get a lot of people running into roadblocks. We also get a lot of people just assuming they're illegal and then spreading that misinformation. One thing I have found in this community is that there are a lot of people who really want the dream and are really romanticizing it, maybe not willing to do the work. And so that's just unfortunately, if you're not going to put in the time, you might not reap the results that you want. So the work is really important in this case. And so in terms of tiny houses on wheels, that's a really, really tiny piece of the puzzle. So small sustainable structures as a secondary dwelling unit on properties are legal as well. So you asked about kind of the regulation. So there is a bill that was passed in February of 2019 called Bill 108. It's called the More Homes, More Choices Act. And within this bill, there was a section about secondary dwelling units. So it's the government of Ontario's basically solution for the affordable housing crisis. This section essentially puts the onus on municipalities to change their bylaws, their zoning bylaws, to allow residential homes, residential, rural, residential, agricultural, anywhere that you have a principal home, to then allow a secondary dwelling unit on this property. So this means every single property that qualifies, so that means a single detached row townhomes, basically across Ontario, can now have either a secondary dwelling unit built detached from their home, so something like a tiny house. And when I say tiny house, I'm not just blanketing that as a tiny house on wheels. I just mean a small structure, a prefab, a modular. We're using that kind of language. For the secondary dwelling unit, you can also build an attic or, an attic apartment, a basement apartment, and you can also have an outdoor attached dwelling. So basically what this is allowing is just high density within, a low density area. So instead of building out and building up, we're getting to retrofit homes that can then be used as income properties for a lot of people. So where does this kind of fall in the formula? So how do people kind of embark on this journey? Well, the biggest kind of challenge for so many people is, I want to buy a tiny house, I want to buy the structure, whether it's on wheels, whether it's not, because you can tow a small structure basically anywhere depending on the size, and some are obviously a lot more expensive than others. But say you want to build an 8-foot by 30-foot small structure, on wheels or not, and you want to live somewhere. Unfortunately, right now, buying land is way too expensive and extremely rare. A lot of people on this journey will not find access to land, especially if they're looking for affordable housing. That opportunity to have, anywhere from $60,000 in smaller, less expensive areas, or $1 million closer to the city, you have to pay for land 100% down. There's really not a lot of loopholes that get around that. And so then what we're looking for is the model of people living on someone else's property as a land steward or otherwise. And so whether that's someone's parents come back to the property or introducing multi-generational living, however that looks, we're talking about building another structure for someone else to live in, or yourself. And so how do you do that? You'll have two groups of people. You'll have someone who, like my husband and I, who have our own structure and we want to live on someone's property. Then you're going to have someone who just wants to build a secondary dwelling unit and then have tenants come in and live there. And so how do you make, option A happen, which a lot of people want to do because they want a sense of home ownership. They want to have their own structure. This is where you get very tricky, is that do townships and municipalities allow you to bring your own structure to someone else's property to then hook it up to either municipal services or the principal property services, or hook it up to septic, or even place your own septic in there? There's a whole bunch of legalities, land lease agreements, lawyers agreements, different things that you have to embark on. So this is a very difficult process. Once it keeps happening, it'll be more streamlined. The great news is that it is possible. A lot of townships will allow you to bring a piece of property that you own to somebody else's property. It's just, you need to have that piece of property, that tiny house or whatever has been built. It needs to be built to the CSA certification, so Canada Standards Association, and it needs to be built to the Ontario Building Code to be permitted to live there. And you need to have it hooked up to the services of the principal house or a septic service. And so there are tons of different ways that you do that. And people who are listening to this, I don't want to go on about all those little details. Just reach out to me, send me an email, and I'm sure you'll link that in the show notes. You're dealing with so many different things. So that's kind of the super long-winded explanation. The great news is it is possible. It's just very circumstantial in the areas that you live in.
Well, it's a great segue though into what some of the services that you do provide, because you do specialize in downsizing, and I know that you've got some resources available. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your business and what you're doing and how you can help others?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have two arms to my business. So I am a sustainable living specialist and also a tiny house consultant. So with this kind of business that I'm building, I really believe that it's important to really marry the two. Sustainable living at its core is really one of the only ways we are going to protect our land, and people who want to live small and live sustainably, they're on that journey anyway. And so with sustainable living, I essentially wrap that around minimal living, permaculture, and I coach other people on how to downsize and live with less. So that doesn't necessarily mean from a large structure to a small structure. That means purging your space, reorganizing your home. That means setting, boundaries around spending. That can be coaching on how to earn back your own money by learning how to reduce your consumptive habits. I do a lot of kind of guiding and coaching on specific principles in that way. And then in the Hamilton area where I live and surrounding areas, I do in-person decluttering and purging, going through spaces, not necessarily Marie Kondoing them, because I have a very different approach, and that's where sustainability comes into it. I kind of teach people how to re-love the things that they already have and approach what they own sustainably, and then approach consuming sustainably. So I break down a lot of barriers on that success formula. I talk to people a lot about how their consumption habits and their lifestyle habits really affects our spatial and mental overwhelm. And so a lot of people reach out to me because they have so many things. They don't know what to do with it. They've got so many things on the go. They don't know how to triage their decisions appropriately and that are serving them. So there's a whole mentality behind the way that I approach my sustainable living kind of guiding and coaching. And so basically the overwhelmed person, the overwhelmed mother, all of those different things, they reach out, and then we just go through how to reduce your spatial and mental overwhelm sustainably, and that makes sense for you. Now, for the tiny house consulting piece of it, because I'm kind of one of the front runners in this movement in the area in Canada, or in Ontario rather, that is living out loud with it. I essentially coach on people reach out to me because they either want to find land, they want to find a tiny house, they want to find a manufacturer, they want to find a builder. And so essentially a big piece of my business is working as a consultancy for green builders, for eco architects, for people to actually come in. And so when you'd like to actually build a tiny home or source that out or figure out the journey, I project manage the entire journey for people. Some people don't have the time or capacity to figure that out or want to do the research. I do all of that for them because I've been there. And then there are people who just want a few specific answers on, okay, well, how do I actually go about this journey? Where do I start? How do I, not make mistakes? Because there are so many avenues that you can be brought down that won't lead you down the road to success in tiny living. And so essentially I have clients who are looking to find land. I have clients who are looking to build a tiny house, small structure. And I essentially guide them on all of those considerations, because living tiny is so much more than just living in a small space. You have your energy to look at, you have placement on the property. I use permaculture to help people do land design. And when you bring, structures to the property, how to make sure that structure is now serving the land rather than taking away from it, and those kind of things. So the tiny house consulting is just essentially how to get people in tiny houses legally, and I ensure that it's all covered. So I do bylaw research, zoning research for them, all that kind of stuff as a liaison. So
that's lots amazing. And I think you're going to be so busy in the future. And there's so many facets to what you're doing. I'm thinking too of just all these, like you're saying, these overwhelmed moms. And I think lockdowns have really kind of slapped everyone in the face with where they're living, because they're stuck here all the time and they're starting to see that overwhelm daily. And how can I fix this? How can I change this? How can I, make this work for me, seeing as I'm going to be here for such a long time? I used to have an escape, going to work or going out of the house. And now they're going, okay, something needs to change here. Something needs to bend. So I can see that you're going to be very busy in the future.
I do have a lot of moms reach out. Yeah.
Just bringing it back to the family again, you're raising a young son. He's what I think 3 now. Is he 3 years old? What kind of vision do you have for your family, and what kind of values are you trying to instill in your young son, your young family?
Oh, I love that you asked that question. It's funny. I was actually just doing work for a client before this call about a holistic decision-making process. And so there's this permaculture principle founded by Dan Palmer, who's an Australian. Basically, the holistic decision-making process is there's a profound difference between goals and quality of life. So when we set goals for ourselves, where, I want a big house, I want a nice car, I want a good job, I want $80,000 a year and you're setting these tangibles, which are very valuable for some people, but quality of life is so different. So instead of saying, my name is Bianca and I want a big house, I want a big garden, I want these different things, I say, you know, I am me, I am resilient, I am a guiding light for others in this world. I am happy and I'm living self-reliant. My family is happy and healthy. So you're building these visions that really set you on a path to greater, I guess, success. And I'm air quoting that for those who are listening, to really find, you know, what makes sense for you. And then all the decisions you make from then on out serve you. So in terms of motherhood, and in terms of raising Bodhi and kind of the visions that I have for my family, we all just want to live simply. My husband and I really just at the end of the day want more time for each other than we do for other things that don't matter. We want to have a relationship with nature, because if you don't have a relationship with nature, there really isn't a whole lot motivating you to change it and to protect it. And so with Bodhi, I want him to grow up in a world that is green. I want him to see the world that I saw. I don't want him to be living in this space that people are over consuming and treating the world like a trash bin. And so our vision is to just build community and build relationships and be kind and give grace and come at things with, you know, realistic expectations, but also just keeping our mental health and our relationship with nature and our relationship with each other on the forefront. And tiny living has really given us that gift. We are able to slow down when we need to because we don't have a large financial overhead. I'm able to work on my business instead of worrying about going to a 9-to-5 where I have to make that income and I have to meet those bills and I have to do those things. And it's a privilege now, but it took a really long time to get here. And it was a really tough journey. This was not easy at all. And I want Bodhi to see that you can live self-reliantly and live self-resiliently and not have to worry about what other people think about you and keeping up with those people. And that's going to really be the way of the future. If you're not living sustainably and you're not caring for the world, you might just be shut out. And it's a really unfortunate piece of the puzzle. But I want to give Bodhi what he needs to live in a world that he can protect and he can be proud of, and that I can be proud of too.
I find myself reflecting a little while listening to you with such a young family, and my family is at the point now where actually, I don't know if you know, but I have 5 sons. Wow. I get that gasp. That's usually the reaction I get. My husband and I have an 18-year-old, and then they're about 2 years apart up to 28 years old. So our 28-year-old son is married with a 1-year-old and a 3-week-old. Our family is definitely different from the way our extended family operates. So, you know, in-laws and stuff very much had that vision of success being very money driven, professional careers. And we kind of took this different approach of my husband had the opportunity to advance in his workplace. He decided not to, for his mental health as well as for his family's health. And that shift, I think, made such a huge difference in the way we raised our kids. Our kids remember their dad being home. So yes, he worked, he was full-time working, but he was home in the evenings, he was home on the weekends. And we spent a lot of time outside. We're fortunate that we're in the rural area, so we do live on a farm property. My kids grew up outside. My husband organic gardens. I like to say we organic garden, but it's really him. You know, we would be outside, and the kids have these great memories of being outside and being raised outside. And, you know, me handing them a backpack full of snacks and a walkie-talkie, and them going out to the back bush to their secret spot. Only dad was allowed to go check it out. Mom wasn't allowed. When I see my kids now as adults and how they're starting to structure their own lives and how they're putting family first, I feel it's so rewarding just to see that and to say, okay, you know, we've got success and it just looks different to other people. Unfortunately, some of our extended family have had failed marriages, have spent a lot of time with their careers that they've had to sacrifice some of those family things. And, you know, everything, it looks different. I don't judge or anything, but I just am so happy with where we turned out. And I know it could have been so different because of, you know, the path that we were kind of expected to take, but chose not to. So I applaud all these young families who are really taking all of this into consideration and making these bold changes. So I'm really happy for you because I know that I can see the future that you are planning, and it's so bright.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot. Thank you so much. Especially when somebody was 5 boys. Wow. Thank you.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't know how we survived it, but we did. I think I'd love to just finish this off with, we talk here a lot about small steps. Not everybody's going to be running out to go tiny and get the small house and do this significant change. But what are some of the small steps that people can take to live a more sustainable lifestyle and kind of incorporate some of these values, but not necessarily that huge step?
So this kind of comes at a little bit of a dual approach. I think one of the biggest, practices people can, and gifts people can give themselves, is to get outside and to build a relationship with the natural world, and to do that respectably, and to know the impact that they're having on the world, because that if that relationship with nature is there, then that means to want to protect it will be fueling the habits that they build moving forward. And so, we live in a really privileged area where we don't see a lot of the effects of climate change. And so building that relationship is just more important to build intentionality and purpose about how we live the rest of our lives. So moving to kind of in the home, how can we help ease our spatial and mental overwhelm and our decision fatigue that we feel? That would be definitely approaching things more intentionally, giving yourself grace to slow down, looking around your visible spaces and start that decluttering process of having things find a home. Think of your invisible spaces, your storage spaces that have things that might not be serving you anymore, and clearing that out. I'm a really firm believer that our homes really are our sanctuaries. And if they're not set up to serve us in our habits, and especially having children, to give them ownership over their spaces. And with people being at home right now, there is no better time to start giving your children autonomy in doing those things that keep the household running. And rather than sticking a screen in front of them or expecting them to find that freedom out of boredom. And so, this is a really great opportunity for that. But I would definitely say the tangibles would be to just take a breath, look around, see what is causing you that spatial and mental overwhelm. And oftentimes that means a reducing consumptive habits, which can really ease your financial overwhelm. And so, we're ordering a lot of things online. We're really distracting ourselves with things, and that might be the work that will not serve you in the end. And so in terms of that, just take a breath, get outside, figure out what makes sense for your family, figure out what makes sense for yourself, build a relationship with nature, start really focusing on your consumptive habits and how that can really affect your mental health and the output on the world. I'm an environmentalist, so I'm always roping everything into protecting the earth moving forward. And so those are just really small tangibles in terms of, you don't need to be perfect. We don't need a million people doing a million different things perfectly. We need everyone just doing one or two things. And so approaching your consumption consciously can lead into different changes. Support local in lieu of larger companies. Figure out where your finances and your hard-earned money are going. And there's definitely a local family that could be better served with that. And just those small steps to start rebuilding our economy and rebuilding our mental health, and really just being super intentional about it.
That's awesome. And, I just love everything that you're doing. Thank you so much, Bianca, for spending this time with us. I'm going to make sure in the show notes, we've got all of your contact information and how to follow you. I know I found you on Instagram. I'm so glad I did. And I'll be following your journey. And the sun is finally shining out here. We've got a blanket of snow on the ground, but I think it's a great time for me to get outside and get a little walk in and head down to the lake and enjoy that time. So I wish you a wonderful day. Thanks again so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Start Small. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and found a small step you can take today. Make sure you share it with a friend. And if you have not done so yet, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and if you are enjoying this podcast, consider taking a moment and leaving us an honest review in your Apple podcasting app so more people can be inspired to take small steps towards social impact.